Hello again. In this video, we're talking all about unemployment. So a quick reminder from previous videos in terms of the definition of unemployment. Remember that in order to be counted as unemployed, you must not be working at the moment, but looking for work, as in you've applied to jobs within the last 2 to 4 weeks. So not working, but looking for work. To calculate unemployment, you've got a formula. And that formula is unemployment equals the number of unemployed people divided by the labor force. Remember that labor force equals the number of employed plus the number of unemployed. And I'm going to put that in parentheses. If you have any problems on an exam or where you need to calculate this, make sure that you're following those order of operations, okay? So the number of unemployed divided by the labor force, that bottom part is the labor force, following order of operations. All right, so I just want to make sure that you understand how to work with this equation or what this equation means. So suppose somebody is currently employed, but they lose their job. All right, so somebody is working, but they lose their job. Then one way to think about it is that they move from this number employed to the number unemployed, and the number of unemployed on the top grows. So the bottom is staying the same, right? They're still in the labor force. They're just moved from employed to unemployed. And the numerator or the top of that fraction has gotten bigger. So if the top of a fraction gets bigger, when the bottom of the fraction stays the same, that relationship, right, that unemployment rate is going to grow. And actually, I just realized I probably should tell you this is times 100 because you're getting a percent. So if someone, I'm going to write it out, make sure you have it. If someone goes from being employed to unemployed, the unemployment rate rises. Honestly, you're probably like, really, Dr. Wilsker? We already knew that, right? There's nothing that you're telling me that's surprising. But what I do want to talk about is other ways or other times that this equation can change, and it's not necessarily as intuitive. Suppose, for example, sorry, I talk faster than I write. Suppose, for example, that somebody who was discouraged. Remember what a discouraged worker is from a previous video. A discouraged worker is somebody who's not in the labor force and not looking for work, not because they don't want to work, but because they just don't have hope that they're going to find a job. So someone who was discouraged right? They get some hope. Something's changed. A new plant is opening in town. Someone who was discouraged decides to start applying. And again, this can happen when you've got like a new plant, a new facility. Maybe somebody moves from one community to another. Right? Or maybe they went and got their CDL license to drive a truck or something of that nature. So somebody who was discouraged decides to start applying. So again, thinking about that formula, number of unemployed, I'm going to abbreviate this time, divided by the number in labor force. If they were discouraged before, they were not counted as unemployed and they were not in the labor force. So when they come back to work, this labor force number is going to go up by 1, and the unemployment number goes up by 1. So our numerator is increasing by 1, our denominator is increasing by 1. How's that going to affect the rate? And the best way that I could tell you this, right, to get you to buy in, because it's not going to stay the same, is to just use some simple fractions. Suppose before this person started looking for work, that we had one person unemployed and 4 people in the labor force. All right, so one person out of the 4 was unemployed. That means the other 3 were working. 1 over 4 means I've got an unemployment rate of 25%. Now that this discouraged worker is back, right? So again, they were discouraged, now they're looking. I'm going to have 2 people that are currently looking for work out of the 5 people that are now in the labor force. Okay, so now I've got 2 over 5, which means my unemployment rate in this case would be 40%. If all I do is focus on the unemployment rate, as you see, from 25 to 40 went up. It looks like a bad thing. But again, it didn't go up for a bad reason. It went up because there's new opportunities in town and people that were discouraged decide to start looking again. So it's not necessarily the case that a small upward tick in the unemployment rate is necessarily a bad thing if it indicates that some people who are not in the labor force are coming back. And remember, our labor force participation rate is still below where it was before COVID. It's still just under 63%. So there's room for a couple million more people to come back into the labor market. Similarly, what if somebody drops out, right? It would be the reverse. If you've got 2 out of 5 that are unemployed, so your unemployment rate is 40, and one of them just gives up, figures they're never going to find a job that they like or that they're qualified for, so they stop, right? Then my unemployment rate is going to go from the 2 out of 5, the 40%, to a 1 out of 4, 25%. My unemployment rate fell, but not for a good reason if it's because somebody just gave up. Sorry, catching up on my notes here. So the point is that it's great to know the unemployment rate, and it can tell us a lot, but understand it's not the only thing we want to think about when we're looking at the big picture of the economy. The other thing we might want to see that's reported monthly is the number of jobs created. So we have ways of measuring that. Every time I hire somebody at the shop, I have to fill out paper and submit it to the state of Georgia, letting them know that we have a new hire. Same thing when somebody quits or they get fired, that paperwork goes in. So the fact that we had 2 full-time employees in, I guess, July, right, and we have 3 now, that's an example of a job created. Okay, so that's one of the ones created. Our economy created or had a net addition of roughly 180,000 jobs last month. All right, so that's where we were, is roughly 180,000. It's a positive number. It sounds good. Honestly, we'd like to see it higher, but the fact that we're not losing net jobs yet is still a positive thing as well. Now, the unemployment rate that you hear in the news is what's referred to as U3. So the rate that we've calculated, right, talking about who's included, and who's not included, all of that is part of U3. It's the U3 formula that we've been discussing thus far. There are 6 total formulas. So the largest one, so I should say here, U3 is what you hear in the media. So that's the roughly 3.5% that you hear now. And then U6 is the largest one. Oops, that's a 6. That does not look like a 6. Let me try that again. U6 is the largest one. And what U6 is going to do is it's going to say, let's add back in the discouraged workers. Or let's look at the people who are working part-time but really want full-time jobs, or people who are underemployed. And so it's going to add these folks back in. And what we find is that U6, when you count all of these workers that are not happy in their current roles, that it's approximately twice the size of that U3 rate. So when we hit, for example, over 9%, close to 10% unemployment in the Great Recession back in 2009, the U6 rate, if you were to count in the discouraged workers and the folks that are having to work part-time because they can't find full-time work, it was closer to 20%. So it's pretty consistent, almost twice as high. So right now we've got, like I said, it's roughly a 3.5% unemployment rate. If we threw in the discouraged workers and those that are working part-time until they can find full-time work, it's closer to 7%. So now I want to talk about the types of unemployment. I'll switch the color here. All right, the types of unemployment. The first one is the one that we're least concerned with. So I'm doing these like in the order of, I guess, concern or importance, and I'm starting with the least and building up. So the least concerning one is what we refer to as frictional unemployment. Root word of frictional is friction. If you know the definition of friction, it's the force between two objects. So frictional unemployment just means you're in between. You're in between two good jobs or in between school and a job, but still that idea of you have the right skills, you're well qualified for things. The economy will likely, or I shouldn't say the economy, you will likely find another position in the near future. All right, that is frictional unemployment. So this would be me deciding I'm not happy at GGC, walking in and quitting. I've got the skills to go get another job if I so choose. So frictional unemployment, not a huge deal. When you guys graduate college, depending on how the economy's going at the time, you might expect anywhere from 3 months in a very great labor market to 9 months in a not so great market to find your first job placement. But again, fresh college graduates would be part of that frictional unemployment rate. The second type is what we refer to as structural unemployment. Couple ways to think about this one as well. Generally, what I like to say, I think of the S's, that structural unemployment refers to a lack of skills. The skills you have are no longer demanded in the workplace. This could be true of miners, for example, right? They've got a skill, right? Mining, but it's no longer something that we're doing as much of. There's no longer as many jobs in that area. So those skills don't translate well. You can't go straight from mining to, say, long distance, 18-wheeler driver type thing, right? There's something that has to happen in between. So your skills don't match what's in demand is basically one way of thinking about it. Or that the value of your skill is no longer what it used to be. People just don't want to hire you for the wage that you believe you're worth. And it can be very hard for people to fall into this group. It is devastating for families, but it's still not the most concerning type of unemployment because there is a solution. Again, this would also include everybody that gets laid off because they get replaced by technology, okay? There is a solution to this, and that has to do with education and training. You can go back to school for something else. You can get certified in something else. The economy overall may be growing. You should be able to find something new. It's just going to take you a little bit of work to get there. And again, it can be tough on families, right? If it's your partner that has lost their job, right, and now you're trying to survive on one income, it is hard. I promise you. I feel you. It's hard. But again, there is that solution. So, frictional and structural. The combination of frictional and structural, if we add them up, we have a name for that. It's what we call the natural rate of unemployment. In other words, we're always going to have some unemployment. It's unavoidable. There's always going to be people that are quitting their jobs or graduating from school. There's always going to be people that are replaced by technology, right? Or people whose positions may be shifted overseas. I actually don't think that's a bad thing, but we can discuss that on another day. Maybe in class we'll get to the controversial issues. But the point is, you're always going to have these things. And so those two things combined are the natural rate of unemployment. In other words, we can't expect 0% unemployment. In the United States, our natural rate is currently about 3.5%. It's been higher, 4.5% 20 years ago, but it has come down. And that's because the natural rate is subject to change based on policy. So, for example, in the United States, our natural rate is lower than it currently is in Europe, and that's because their policies, their unemployment benefits, are more generous than ours. So maybe we'll talk about that in the last video when we get into some of the issues. But anyways, in the United States, it's approximately 3.5%. The last type of unemployment, and I guess there's technically a couple more, like seasonal unemployment, but we're not going to focus on that. I don't think it's that big of a deal. The last one that we are going to talk about that is the biggest deal is cyclical unemployment. I hope I spelled that right. Oops, I'm still messing up. Sorry about that, folks. Cyclical, where the root word there is essentially cycle. This is unemployment that results from the business cycle. In other words, it's resulting from a recession or an upcoming recession. So this is what happens, recession, we'll just keep it messy. This is what happens when a bunch of companies are laying off. So you're working for a consulting company, maybe you're some type of analyst, and they lay you off, and it stinks. But all the big consulting companies are laying off because all of the businesses are worried about a recession in the future, so they start cutting what they view as maybe some of their more optional spending. This has nothing to do with you wanting to leave your job. It has nothing to do with you not having, quote unquote, good enough skills. It has everything to do with the fact that a recession is coming or a recession is here. And it is the worst type of unemployment because there is no easy solution. How do you end cyclical unemployment? You end the recession. Even then, it's not a guarantee. If you look at 2008, 2009, that was our last major recession. All right, so 2008, 2009, you might have heard about it. We had the collapse in the housing market. We had a credit crunch from banks, lots of different things going on. And unemployment went up, I mentioned before, right? Unemployment got to 9, 10%. U6 was double that, close to 20%. We experienced what we referred to as the jobless recovery. In other words, when firms laid a bunch of people off in 2008, 2009, as the economy started to improve, and the economy did improve, it actually was not a very long recession, but as the economy started to improve, instead of bringing back workers, companies went ahead and used this time to implement new technologies, to install new technologies. And so what you ended up happening is that the recession was over, GDP was rising again by the end of 2009, early 2010, but the jobs were still not back. It took us years, well into, I think, 2014, 2015, to get to the point where we had the same number of people working as we did prior to the crash in 2008, 2009. So the recession was over, but it took us several years after that to get our unemployment rate back down to where it was. Because again, it was one of those moments of, well, now that we don't have the workers, it's probably a good time to upgrade things. So anyways, just letting you know, cyclical unemployment, the worst, the hardest to get back, and the fact that nowadays technology can do so many things that I would imagine that when recessions occur, which I will say the good news is they're less frequent and less severe than in the past, but when they do occur, I would imagine this trend of the jobless recoveries is kind of being here to stay. It's a good time to point out that a recession has nothing to do with the unemployment rate. Recession is only related to GDP. It is 3 or more consecutive quarters of falling GDP. Hopefully I've got that in a previous video. If not, I definitely need to put it there. But 3 or more quarters of falling GDP. So once GDP starts to go up again, recession is over. That does not mean the jobs are back. So again, just emphasizing here that the unemployment rate is independent of a recession, okay? Let me see if there's anything else I want to say in here. Oh, real quickly, how do you find the cyclical unemployment rate? So you could take the current unemployment rate, subtract the natural rate, and that'll tell you what your cyclical rate is. So if we got to a point where, say, our unemployment rate reached 6%, and our natural rate is roughly 3.5%, then 2.5% would be our cyclical unemployment rate. All right, I'm pretty sure I went over 15 minutes. I should have paid attention to when I started. I've still got, I think, one more video to do for labor markets, but hopefully you guys are watching and you're enjoying, and I'll post the next one shortly.